and welcome to another episode of My Wine Smarts. I'm Victoria, and today I'll be your guide through the world of bubbly. The world of sparkling wines is quite complex. Sparkling wines are made in many different places using a variety of methods. They can also be made from many different grapes, both red and white. Depending on where and how they're made, sparkling wines vary in price from easy drinking and refreshing $10 bottles to special occasion bottles that can easily cost in the hundreds of dollars. So knowing the basics of sparkling wines will help you choose the right wine for any occasion and spend your money wisely. There are many hidden gems in the world of sparkling wines if you know where to look for them. So let's get started. In this episode, we'll talk about some of the basic terms used to describe sparkling wines, including what you can learn from the name and the label of a sparkling wine. We'll also describe the most common types of sparkling wines and offer suggestions for producers you can try in each category. Let's start with the most famous sparkling wine, champagne. The term champagne is often loosely used to refer to any sparkling wine, but a sparkling wine can only be called champagne if it's produced in the Champagne region of France using a centuries-old method. In this method, the second fermentation, the one that creates the bubbles in the wine, takes place in the bottle itself. This method of production is quite involved and time-consuming, which causes the production costs to be higher. Also, the wines from this area have built a strong reputation for excellence over time. They became the favorites of many kings and famous people. All of these factors have had an effect on the price of champagne. The best can often cost hundreds, even thousands of dollars. Some champagne is made by large companies with very recognizable brands, Veuve Clicquot, Henriot, Mumm, to mention just a few. But much champagne is also made by small producers, and this champagne is often referred to as grower champagne, because the producer grows his or her own grapes as opposed to buying them. Each champagne producer has a style of champagne, so don't be surprised if different champagnes have quite different flavors, from apple and flowery aromas to buttery toast, chocolate, and brioche. In general, champagne is complex, elegant, and pairs well with many foods, from brunch fare to elegant and full-bodied dishes. Champagne is also the perfect pairing for fried foods. The bubbles and the acidity of the wine complement the richness of the food. So next time you're wondering what to enjoy with fried chicken or fried calamari, consider champagne. Champagne, especially rosé champagne, is also the perfect pairing for chocolate. While champagne producers have their own styles, there are certain things in making champagne that are prescribed by law. By law, champagne can be made from Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. Often, all three grapes are used. Sometimes, however, champagne is made only from Chardonnay. Such champagne is labeled Blanc de Blanc. Blanc de Blanc is usually slightly lighter in body and more elegant than regular champagne. It also often has fresh, citrusy flavors. When made only from red grapes, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier, champagne is labeled Blanc de Noir. Blanc de Noir can be made from one of the red grapes or both, and is usually darker in color, more toward golden rather than yellow. Blanc de Noir is the fullest-bodied champagne and pairs well with richer foods. Both Blanc de Blanc and Blanc de Noirs are rarer than regular champagne, and that is reflected in their price. There's also rosé champagne, which can range from pale salmon to deep pink in color. The pink color usually comes from adding a little Pinot Noir to the Chardonnay wine. Rosé champagne is rarer than regular champagne and usually slightly higher in price. Rosé champagne tends to be fuller-bodied than regular champagne or Blanc de Blanc, and it often has berry flavors. Another important term found on champagne bottles is the level of dryness or sweetness of the wine. You may remember from the Wine Basics episode that a wine is considered dry if it has no detectable sugar, in other words, when you feel no sweetness on the palate. Champagne that is completely dry is labeled Brut Nature or Brut Sauvage. From that point on, the sweetness increases through the levels: extra brut, brut, extra dry, dry, semi-dry or demi-sec, and doux or sweet. So dry champagne is not really dry. It has a fair amount of sugar, and you can taste some of it on the palate. Most champagne on the market is extra brut or brut, But if you're in the mood for something sweeter, try a semi-dry champagne. Semi-dry champagne is a good pairing for desserts because the sugar in the wine can match the sugar in the dessert. Keep in mind that how sweet a champagne tastes is also determined by the producer. So brewed champagnes from two different producers might be quite different in sweetness levels. As a general rule, brewed champagne will be rather dry, and it's a good starting place to learn about what types of champagne you like. When shopping for champagne, you'll notice that most bottles don't have a vintage year. This is because most champagne is what's called non-vintage, labeled as NV on the bottle. It's actually a blend of wines from several different years. When the grapes for making champagne come only from one year, the year is on the bottle and then the champagne is a vintage champagne. Vintage champagne is more difficult to produce and therefore always more expensive. But it's also more complex and robust, and it's worth splurging on. For special occasions, I like to drink vintage champagne. It's quite a memorable experience. To get a sense for the differences in champagne, try a bottle made by a large company such as Veuve Clicquot next to a bottle from a smaller producer such as Pascal Duquet. The basic Veuve Clicquot champagne is fresh and crisp with fruity flavors and a slight aftertaste of pastry. The Duquet Blanc de Blanc is rich and complex, with aromas of pastry and baked apples and a complexity that stays with you. Pay attention to what you're tasting by jotting down a few notes using the sparkling wine tasting sheets on the My Wine Smarts website. As we mentioned, sparkling wines can only be called champagne if they're made in the Champagne region of France. Sparkling wines made elsewhere in France go by different names. The most common of these names is Crémant. Crémant is a sparkling wine produced in France but outside the Champagne region. It's produced in the same method used for the production of champagne, so the second fermentation is in bottle, but it doesn't have to spend as much time in the cellar before being released. The great news is that Crémant is much less expensive than champagne, and while it often doesn't have the same level of complexity, it can be a very satisfying and elegant wine. Crémants vary in flavor depending on where they're produced and from what grapes. Like champagne, Crémants pair well with a wide variety of foods and can also be enjoyed before a meal. The most famous Crémants come from the French regions of Alsace, Burgundy or Bourgogne in French, and the Loire River Valley. So next time you're in the mood for sparkling wine but don't want to splurge on champagne, try Crémant. You'll keep going back for more of that refreshing and clean flavor, whether you're enjoying the wine before a meal or paired with food. Outside of France, many other countries produce sparkling wines. The laws governing the production of these wines differ quite a bit, as do the methods of production, the grapes from which the wines are made, and the prices. One of the most common and well-known sparkling wines is Prosecco. Prosecco is a sparkling wine from Italy, more specifically from the Veneto region in northeastern Italy. The wine is made from the Prosecco grape, and the method used is less complicated than the method for producing champagne. Prosecco is a fresher tasting wine, often with flavors and aromas of apple, pear, and citrus. It's less complex than champagne, but can be quite satisfying as an opener to a lineup of other wines. It pairs well with lighter foods, especially appetizers. It's also perfect to sip on its own, especially in the summer outdoors. Most Prosecco is fairly dry and labeled Brut or Extra Brut, but some Prosecco has more sugar and is labeled Extra Dry. Prosecco is usually priced between $10 and $25 and makes a perfect party wine. To get a sense for the typical flavors of Prosecco, try a couple of different Proseccos, such as Yellow Prosecco, which has a crisp and refreshing flavor with aromas of apple and flowers. Another good representative of Prosecco is Nino Franco Prosecco Rustico, which is quite elegant and more complex with aromas of fruit mixed with aromas of bread dough and very pleasant bubbles. Another sparkling wine that has gained much popularity in North America over the last couple of decades is Cava. Cava is a sparkling wine from Spain. It can come from one of several regions and is made with a variety of Spanish grapes such as Xarel-lo, Parellada, and Macabeo. Chardonnay can also sometimes be added. Cava is made in the same method as champagne, so it can have a similar complexity. It often has aromas and flavors of toast and nuts and is fuller bodied than Prosecco, closer to champagne. Like all sparkling wines, it pairs well with many different foods, but it goes particularly well with fuller-bodied appetizers such as ham or aged cheeses. After all, Cava is a drink of choice in Spanish tapas bars. Cava ranges in price from about $10 to over $30. Given its complexity, it's always a great deal. To get a sense for the variety of Cava, try a lower-priced one such as Fregionnet, which is fresh and citrusy. For something more complex, try a Crémant Grand Cuvée Cava, which is richer and more complex, closer to champagne, and an excellent value. In this episode, we explored some of the most common sparkling wines and learned the basic terms used on sparkling wine labels. This will help you next time you're looking for a sparkling wine. Based on what you learn, you can decide what wine would best suit your next occasion and use your preferences for dry versus sweet or lighter-bodied versus fuller-bodied wines to decide which sparkler to pick. As always, thanks for joining me for this episode. If you would like to learn more about wine and get some great wine recommendations, go to www.mywinesmarts.com and explore the resources we have there, or contact us about an individual or small group wine coaching session. Until next time, keep learning about wine and keep tasting.